The GT7 launches through the final corner, its carbon fiber body blurring into a streak of precision as the razor-edged chassis slices through the air like a monsoon blade. The front splitter kissing the asphalt with surgical precision. Monitors flicker, speed traces vanish. A single pixel fracture dissolves before the crowd registers it. Yet every engineer in the garage freezes mid-breath, their lungs suspended in time until the screen snaps back into stillness like a held breath finally released. A pressure graph flickers on the diagnostics terminal. A heartbeat so delicate it evaporates before the stands even blink. But inside the garage, spines lock rigid, breaths hang suspended in stale air as the screen snaps back into stillness like a held breath finally released. The GT7 glides into the service bay, its V8 growling a low, interrogative pulse that reverberates through the Cavitaciones workshop like a ghostly echo. But the diagnostics terminal remains stubbornly silent. No one prepared to solve this riddle with a pivotal race weekend, beginning in less than 72 hours. Evelyn Vance, Vortex Motorsports' razor-sharp CEO, storms down from her glass-walled office not to celebrate victory, but to demand a flaw vanish before the world notices it exists. Her stiletto heels crack against concrete like a countdown timer ticking toward detonation, her jaw set with the precision of a woman who has never lost and refuses to start now. Deep in the lower workshop, where air thickens with the sharp stench of oil and rust, Mason Cole sits motionless on an overturned crate, his cold coffee untouched as engineers upstairs chant diagnostics in shifting voices. An orchestrated desperation to bend the machine's truth into something controllable, their words rising and falling like a funeral dirge for a car they can't save. Officially, Mason Cole is classified as a maintenance mechanic on paper. A quiet man on level 2, a single father walking through his small apartment each night to a sleeping 6-year-old named Luna. Until the moment someone needs someone who actually sees what others miss, someone who understands machines better than he understands his own reflection. By daybreak, Mason will be the only person in the building who understands the GT7's hidden flaw, and by sunrise, Evelyn Vance will fire him for touching what he shouldn't have. All because years ago, he built the car from the ground up, and the world punishes those who know too much. 72 hours earlier, the nightmare hadn't begun. Mason just wanted to finish his shift, hear Luna complain about her lucky socks, and keep his head down long enough to avoid the kind of attention that destroys lives, the kind that turns genius into a liability. Mason's apartment is a sanctuary of controlled precision. 2 identical mugs on the counter, technical manuals lining the shelves instead of novels, a faded GT7 technical drawing pinned in the corner with a thumbtack, its edges softened by years of anxious fingers tracing the lines like braille he's memorized, the ghost of his wife's laughter lingering in the empty spaces between the pages. Luna greets him at the kitchen table in her starprint socks, her stuffed bear cog perched beside her juice glass like an honored guest, already asking the question she asks every morning, "Are you coming home early today?" Her voice small, but threaded with the fragile hope of a child who still believes in promises, her tiny fingers drumming a rhythm only she can hear. Mason ties her shoes with methodical care, his hands moving like a surgeon performing a ritual, his gaze drifting when the past edges too close, each knot a silent promise he's struggling to keep, a vow carved into his bones by grief and guilt. At Vortex Motorsport, no one below level 2 knows much about Mason Cole beyond the thin resume and the dead garage listed as his last employer, but the truth is far older and far more dangerous than his paperwork suggests, buried under layers of corporate doublespeak and forgotten history. Once, Mason was one of the best young engineers Richard Vance ever hired, discovered not through a university pipeline, but through a technical forum where his hand-drawn load diagrams were too exact to ignore, too brilliant to dismiss. Proof that genius doesn't always come with a degree or a title. In 3 short years, Mason designed 7 engine variants, the last one being the GT7, a machine that should have carried his name if grief hadn't stolen his future along with his wife in a road accident, leaving only a baby who wasn't even a year old. He vanished after that, not because he stopped understanding machines, but because the world had become too heavy to carry one day at a time. And when he returned years later, Vortex had changed, Richard Vance was sick, and Cameron Vale had taken control. A man who saw loyalty as a weakness and silence as strength. Mason didn't come back for credit or recognition. He came because the GT7 had a flaw that could kill someone if no one caught it in time, and because he knew cars better than he knew silence, better than he knew how to live in a world that had taken everything from him. By Monday morning, the GT7 had defeated 3 senior engineers, their diagnostics floundering, as the fuel delivery sequence failed in ways the software couldn't name, the tertiary pressure path behaving like a ghost in the machine, a specter haunting the workshop with every failed test. German consultants flew in, spoke in hushed tones, and left without solving anything, their departure leaving behind only the unspoken fear that the car carried a flaw no one was prepared to fix in time. A flaw that could unravel the company's future like a thread pulled too hard. Cameron Vale called a closed meeting where the options were simple and brutal. Postpone the race or pull the vehicle, both choices guaranteed to devastate the company's market value and someone's reputation in the room, the kind of decision that could make or break careers and egos alike. Evelyn Vance inherited Vortex 18 ago, 2 weeks after her father's death, determined to become the leader he trusted. Intelligent enough to see through the noise, forceful when she needed to be, but still young enough to face men who tested her patience for the edges it might hide. Cameron Vale is not the type to test openly. He's worse, calm and measured, speaking in liability and precedent, making fear sound like responsibility, his voice smooth and patient as he outlines the risks of doing nothing at all, the risks of admitting they don't know what they're doing. Mason hears it all through the vent grate above the low-the-wallop, the words filtering down like poison, and when the meeting ends, he stays where he is for a long minute, staring into his dead coffee like it holds answers no one else is willing to see. The bitterness of failure staining the rim of the mug like a scar. Then, so quietly it almost sounds like he's talking to the floor itself, he murmurs, "Tertiary pressure valve. Secondary seal ring. They never read the original drawing. The truth slipping out like a secret no one was meant to hear, buried under years of corporate lies and forgotten blueprints." That night, Mason reads Luna a picture book about gears, her question lingering between them like a puzzle piece. Why do gears need each other? And his answer is simple. Bone deep, because alone, a gear is just metal. When they mesh together, that's when they create motion. The word's a metaphor for his own life, for the connections he's spent years trying to rebuild. Luna falls asleep, with Cog tucked under her chin, her breathing slow and even, but Mason sits at the kitchen table after midnight, his pen moving across paper like a man transcribing something already carved into his bones, each line a bridge back to the man he used to be. By 2 in the morning, he's back at the facility, his Level 2 access card still working because the card doesn't know the difference between a mechanic and the man who wrote half the original maintenance logic for the GT7, the man who designed the car that's now haunting Vortex like a ghost from its own past. He steps over the yellow tape on the bay and opens his toolkit. No drama, no fanfare, just a man bending over a machine like he's listening for its breath, like he's about to whisper a secret it's been waiting years to hear. The tertiary housing comes apart exactly where he expects. Inside where the current manifest says nothing should be, there it is. A small secondary micro-seal ring he once added by hand and never formally documented. A tiny component no modern diagnostic would notice until the failure became catastrophic. He replaces it, reassembles the housing, checks the pressure with the old analog gauge on the wall and waits. The silence in the garage heavier than any engine's roar. The seconds stretching like years into a future he's not sure he'll survive. At 6:47 a.m., the GT7's engine turns over, smooth and alive, the idle perfect, the numbers exact. The machine finally telling the truth it had been hiding for too long, the truth that Mason Cole had known all along. Mason wipes his hands on a rag, packs his kit, and walks back to the lower workshop like it was just another night. But the world has already shifted beneath his feet. The car alive, the engineers stunned, and Cameron Vale watching from the 5th floor through security footage, his smile razor-thin, his mind already calculating damage control. Dominic, the workshop chief, finds Mason at 7:15 a.m. and gives him a look that carries more history than words ever could, the weight of unspoken understanding passing between them without a single syllable. Isaac runs the diagnostic suite and nearly calls the room over twice because he can't believe what he's reading. Every pressure indicator nominal, the fuel delivery variance lower than factory spec, the impossible suddenly real, a result that should have been celebrated but instead feels like a threat. Cameron doesn't tell Evelyn the car is fixed. He calls it a security issue. A maintenance mechanic entered a restricted bay without clearance and touched a critical asset. Words smooth and deliberate, designed to bury the truth under layers of corporate language. Because Vortex is under regulatory review from a prior incident, because the language of risk is easier to believe than gratitude, Evelyn signs the termination notice without hesitation, never knowing the car is better, never knowing she's just fired the man who saved it. Mason walks into Evelyn's office in his work clothes, his shirt clean but carrying the faint smell of machine oil that never quite leaves him, his presence small but unshakable. Like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples in every direction. He doesn't sit, he doesn't make himself larger. He simply stands there, his gaze flickering once over the wall photograph of the first GT series car, a championship image from 10 years earlier. His eyes lingering on a tiny technical mark in the corner, 2 initials and a date that mean everything to him and nothing to anyone else. Cameron stands at Evelyn's side, his voice smooth and patient as he outlines the violation, the danger, the liability. The words designed to make fear sound like responsibility, his influence pressing down like a cold hand on the back of Evelyn's chair. "Do you understand what that vehicle is worth?" Cameron asks, but Mason doesn't look at him. He keeps his eyes on Evelyn, the question hanging between them like a challenge she isn't sure she wants to face. "Do you want the car to run?" Mason says, his voice calm, measured. "Or do you want the paperwork to be correct?" The words are not rude, they are not defiant, they are worse. They are true, and the truth has a way of cutting deeper than any blade. Evelyn looks down at the desk, her fingers tracing the edge of the termination notice. Cameron's touch on the back of her chair almost imperceptible but undeniably there. A reminder of how influence can look like concern when it's really just control. "I'm sorry, Mason," she says, her voice steady but not unshaken. "Your conduct violated safety protocols and the scope of your position. We're terminating your employment effective today." The word's a death sentence for a man who had once been the heart and soul of the GT7. He stands still for 3 seconds, the weight of the words settling over him like dust. Then he buttons his shirt slowly, deliberately, like he's putting on armor, and looks at her one last time, the look of a man who has nothing left to lose and everything to prove. "Before you run the car this weekend," he says, almost gently, "you should read the original design drawings for the GT7. Not the current version, the original. If the company still has them, the words a final gift wrapped in a warning, a chance to undo the damage before it's too late." Then he walks out, not angry, not broken, just finished with the conversation, the door closing behind him with a quiet finality that echoes through the office like a gunshot that could have been avoided, if anyone had bothered to listen when Mason was still speaking. By the time the door closes, Cameron is already calculating how to contain what Mason said. Evelyn is wondering why the word original landed with so much weight. And outside the office, a rival racing organization has started asking dangerous questions about the man from the basement. Mason picks up Luna from the neighbor's apartment that afternoon, her star-print socks bright against the gray concrete. Her stuffed bear Cog, propped beside her juice glass like it's been invited to breakfast on purpose. Her presence a small, stubborn light in the gathering darkness. "Are you home early today?" she asks, her voice small but curious, and Mason answers, "I don't have work anymore." The words simple but laced with something she's too young to name but too perceptive not to feel. She nods like it's a normal thing fathers say when the world changes suddenly, her acceptance of the truth more instinctive than reasoned, as if honesty counts for more than certainty when you're 6 years old. That night, after dinner, after reading, after making sure her socks are washed for the next day, Mason till Luna is asleep before dialing a number he memorized and deleted 3 nights earlier. The phone ringing 4 times before Dominic answers, his voice rough but warm. "I knew you'd call eventually," Dominic says, his voice rough but warm, like he's been waiting for this moment for years. And Mason replies, "The car told on me," the exhaustion and resignation threading through his words like a noose slowly tightening. The race weekend comes and goes, the GT7 running every lap cleanly, finishing second. The best result Vortex has seen in years. But Evelyn stands in the pit lane and feels none of it the way everyone else does. The victory hollow, the car's performance a ghost that won't stop haunting her. The car has told her something, but she still doesn't know the whole shape of it. The truth buried under layers of corporate doublespeak and her own inherited ignorance. The weight of her father's legacy pressing down like a hand on her chest. On Monday morning, she goes looking for Dominic in the lower workshop, where the air is thick with the scent of oil and the hum of machinery, and she finds him eating lunch alone, his coffee cup and sandwich spread out on a workbench that's seen better days. "Did you know who he was?" she asks. Her voice low but direct, her eyes locked on his, and Dominic doesn't even hesitate before answering. "I knew on his 3rd day," the words cutting through the noise like a knife. "Why didn't you tell me?" she presses, her frustration sharpening her words, and Dominic looks at her, then at the empty bay where Mason used to stand, his voice steady and unapologetic. "Because he didn't want me to. And because he had the right to decide that for himself," he says, the words cutting through the noise like a knife. leaving Evelyn speechless for the first time in years. He keeps going, his voice rough with years of unspoken history. 10 years ago, your father hired a 21-year-old with no degree and a paper napkin full of sketches. The kid could draw load distribution so precisely it made older engineers quiet. His name was Mason Cole. Evelyn's breath catches in her throat as the pieces click into place. Dominic's words painting a picture she should have seen years ago if she'd been paying attention to anything beyond her father's shadow. He built the early GT systems, 7 variants. The last one was the GT7. Then his wife died. The baby was not even a year old. He left, and his drawing should have gone with him. But somebody took the original set off his desk and filed the simplified version instead. Dominic continues. Evelyn understands before Dominic says Cameron's name, the realization hitting her like a physical blow, the truth twisting inside her like a knife. That night, she goes into the archive room, the fluorescent lights humming like ghosts of the past, and there, in the company's old storage files, she finds the original handwritten GT7 drawings, the letter Mason had once sent her father, and the missing technical notation that proves the real design authorship was never properly assigned. Cameron had known. Of course he had. He had seen Mason return years later under a different surname and a thin resume, had approved the hiring to keep him close and manageable. A maintenance worker with no title, easier to remove cleanly than a former genius returning to his own work. He had thought the past would stay buried. He had thought the company systems would keep the lie stable forever. But he was wrong, and now the truth is staring Evelyn in the face, demanding to be acknowledged. Evelyn calls Cameron into her office the next afternoon, the air between them thick with unspoken tension, the Venetian blinds casting sharp shadows across the desk like bars in a cage. On the desk are 3 things: the original GT7 drawings, the old internal emails that reattributed the design to the engineering department in aggregate, and the yellowed paper napkin with a pressure diagram drawn in pencil, the evidence of Cameron's betrayal laid bare. Cameron's face doesn't change when he sees them, but the room does, the temperature dropping like a stone, the silence between them heavier than any accusation she could hurl. The licensing deal with the German group is terminated. Evelyn says, her voice steady but cold. The original authorship was never formally assigned. The contract never should have existed. The word's a death knell for Cameron's carefully constructed empire. Cameron begins with the expected language. Company structure, contribution at scale, practical attribution. But Evelyn cuts through it like a blade, her voice sharp and final. Did you take his drawings? She asks. And Cameron doesn't answer fast enough. The hesitation enough to confirm what she already knows, the truth settling over them like a shroud. The room goes quiet, the weight of the revelation pressing down like a physical force, and outside, the GT7 sits below the windows in the workshop bay, polished and silent, carrying in its engine the repair made by the man everyone had dismissed. Evelyn drives to Mason's apartment the next morning, the city streets passing by in a blur, her mind racing with the implications of what she's about to do, the past and future colliding like tectonic plates. Luna opens the door, her star-print socks bright against the faded welcome mat, and her first words are, "My dad is fixing my car." The confidence in her voice a stark contrast to the uncertainty churning inside Evelyn. Inside, Mason is on the kitchen floor cross-legged, a toy car in pieces spread out in front of him, his hands moving with the same precision he once used to design engines. His focus absolute, undisturbed by the visitor in the doorway. He looks up calmly, as if he's been expecting her, his expression neither surprised nor defensive. Just open, honest, the way it should have been years ago. Evelyn puts the letter on the table, the evidence of Mason's true role in Vortex history laid out like an offering, and he picks it up, reads it, holds it longer than most people hold paper, like he's savoring the weight of his own name finally spoken aloud. "My father knew," she says quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, the admission raw and honest, and Mason simply nods, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know," he says, the words simple but laced with years of silence, of being erased, of having his life reduced to a single sheet of paper that never told the full story. "I didn't come back to reclaim anything," he continues, his voice steady. "I came because the car needed someone who understood its original design. That's all." The answer hits her harder than if he'd shouted, because it's not about pride or recognition. It's about responsibility, about doing what's right even when no one is watching. She offers him his old role back, not as a mechanic, not as an invisible body in the lower workshop, but as the engineer he had always been. The genius who built the GT7 from the ground up, the man who saved the car when no one else could. He reads the contract carefully, line by line, his fingers tracing each word like he's relearning a language he once spoke fluently. Then he adds one condition. Xavier gets a full technical briefing before his next race, not the maintenance version. The original design logic. Done, Evelyn says, her voice firm but relieved, the future suddenly feeling brighter, the weight of the past lifting like a fog burned away by the morning sun. Luna appears at the wrong moment and the right moment, one sock on, cog clutched in both hands, and asks whether the visitor is staying for lunch, her question cutting through the tension like a knife through silk. Evelyn smiles and says she can't stay, and Luna looks her over, her sharp eyes missing nothing, before saying, "You have nice shoes." The compliment so unexpected it makes Evelyn laugh despite everything. Then Luna disappears back into her room, leaving Evelyn and Mason in the kitchen, the silence between them now lighter, the air less oppressive, like the truth has finally been spoken, and the world hasn't ended because of it. Mason almost smiles, his guard lowering just enough to let the ghost of warmth slip through. The expression so rare it feels like a gift, a promise that maybe, just maybe, things can change. The GT7's race data has already begun circulating beyond Vortex, the performance numbers making no sense to those who still believe the company's internal storyline. A whisper of something extraordinary spreading through the racing world like wildfire. A rival racing organization noticed first, then a major performance engineering group, then, through the usual quiet channels of motorsport and money, someone with real influence asked the obvious question. Who built this? The question a dagger to the heart of Vortex's carefully constructed facade. The answer came back in fragments. A maintenance mechanic from the basement, a man with a thin resume, a father, a name that had once mattered and had been erased, the truth buried under layers of corporate doublespeak and forgotten history. The offer arrived 2 days later. Not a casual inquiry, not a polite check-in, but an executive-level invitation to join a rival operation as Director of Performance Engineering. A salary several times higher than Vortex had paid him, a dedicated lab, authority to build his own team. That was the twist the company never expected. They had not merely fired a good mechanic, they had created a market for the mech they refused to recognize, the world suddenly realizing what Vortex had discarded like yesterday's trash. Evelyn sees the offer on her screen and says nothing for a long time, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, her mind racing with the implications. She's spent her life trying to become the kind of leader who would never lose talent through ignorance. Mason doesn't answer the rival immediately. He doesn't answer Vortex immediately either. He goes home, eats dinner with Luna, listens to her complain about the biscuits being almost perfect, which is her way of forgiving the universe for its imperfections. He fixes her toy car axle with a screwdriver from the kitchen drawer, his hands moving with the same precision he once used to design engines. Then he reads her a story, his voice steady and warm, the kind of voice that makes a child feel safe in a world that's often too loud and too confusing. He sits through the silence after she sleeps, the apartment quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator, and thinks about all the years he spent trying not to become a man whose value depended on being seen, on being recognized, on having his name spoken aloud. In the morning, he returns to Vortex through the main entrance, the receptionist using his name correctly, the badge on his chest carrying the title he had once held and lost, the weight of his past finally acknowledged, finally given the recognition it deserves. Isaac is already waiting with a stack of questions, his face a mix of confusion and relief. Dominic hands him coffee without speaking, the gesture loaded with years of unspoken history, and the workshop hums with the sound of machines coming back to life around him. On the 15th floor, Evelyn watches from her office window as the workshop comes back to life, the air less oppressive, the future suddenly feeling brighter, the past no longer a weight but a lesson learned the hard way. Mason has options now. For the first time in years, he is not being kept. He is being chosen. The rival offer still sits in Evelyn's inbox. So does the legal paperwork. So do the consequences. But the difference now is simple. Mason is no longer invisible. Months later, the GT7 becomes something else entirely. Not a rescue story, not a scandal, but a platform, a piece of engineering that carries two truths at once. The company almost lost it, and the man who fixed it had once built it from the ground up. Cameron is gone. The records are corrected. The original drawings are restored, and because Evelyn finally understands the future depends on telling the truth about its past, Mason's name goes back onto the technical lineage where it always belonged. The rival company still wants him. That hasn't gone away, neither has the larger offer. It remains on the table like a quiet question. Would he stay where he was erased, or step into a place that knows exactly what he's worth? Mason doesn't answer with a speech. He answers by working. He leads the design review. He briefs the drivers. He builds the next version of the system with the same steady patience he used to tie Luna's shoes, his hands moving with purpose, his mind focused on the future. And when he comes home that night, Luna is waiting with Cog under one arm and a grin that makes the whole apartment feel warmer, her voice bright with expectation. "Did you fix the car?" The question a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there's still something worth fighting for. He looks at her, then at the small life he protected by staying invisible for so long. The sacrifice worth it for the peace it brought, for the love that never wavered even when the world tried to erase him. "Yeah," he says, "and I think we finally fixed something else too. Not the company, not the race, not even the reputation. The name, the story, the truth." The GT7 sits on the track, its engine purring like a satisfied cat, the numbers on the monitors perfect, the car alive in a way it never was before, its performance a testament to the man who understood it when no one else could. Mason ties Luna's shoes before school with the same precision he once used to design engines, his hands moving like a ritual, his gaze drifting away when the past edges too close, each knot a silent promise he's struggling to keep. Luna accepts his answer without argument, her belief in honesty more instinctive than reasoned, as if the world makes more sense when the truth is spoken plainly, even if it's hard to hear. At Vortex, the engineers celebrate the GT7's victory, but Evelyn stands at the edge of the pit lane, her eyes on Mason as he briefs Xavier in the garage, his voice steady and sure, his presence unshakable, the past finally aligning with the future. The rival offer still sits in her inbox, but the weight of it no longer feels like a threat. It feels like an opportunity, a chance to prove that Vortex can change, that leadership means more than just maintaining the status quo. Mason's name is back on the technical lineage, the original drawings restored, the lie corrected, the truth finally attached to the man who built it. The story ending the way it should have started, with the truth finally spoken aloud. Luna's lucky socks are washed and ready for school, her stuffed bear Cog tucked safely in her backpack, her father's presence a constant, unshakable force in her life. The kind of love that doesn't need words to be felt. Mason walks through the workshop, his badge carrying his true title now, his hands steady, his mind focused. The past no longer a burden but a foundation, the future a blank page waiting to be written. The GT7's engine roars to life in the distance, its sound a symphony of precision and power, a testament to the man who understood it when no one else could, the machine finally telling the truth it had been hiding for too long. Evelyn watches Mason from her office window, the sunlight catching the edges of his profile, the weight of the past lifting like a fog burned away by the morning sun. The future suddenly feeling brighter, the world suddenly feeling fairer. The rival offer is still there, but Mason doesn't look at it. He's too busy working, too busy leading, too busy being the engineer he was always meant to be. The man who built the GT7 from the ground up and saved it when no one else could. The story ends not with a grand speech or a dramatic revelation, but with the quiet hum of an engine, the steady hands of a man who knows his worth, and the small bright life of a 6-year-old girl who believes in lucky socks and honest answers. He comes home that night to find Luna waiting with Cog under one arm and a grin that makes the whole apartment feel warmer, her voice bright with expectation. "Did you fix the car?" The question a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there's still something worth fighting for. He looks at her, then at the small life he protected by staying invisible for so long. The love that never wavered, even when the world tried to erase him, and answers with a simplicity that cuts deeper than any grand speech. "Yeah, and I think we finally fixed something else too. Not the company, not the race, not even the reputation. The name, the story, the truth. The quiet, unshakable truth that finally speaks itself aloud when the time is right."